I don't think people are prepared or even aware of what's about to happen right now. And it's like super, super good news for anyone who's running a business.
Sam, have you seen, I feel like there's a new meme that got birthed, and I think Garry's involved with it now, which is the learn to cook, loser. Have you seen this, Sam?
What is that? What is that?
Garry, can you explain this one?
Posted it. I don't even know like what it was a reply to, but it seems to be going viral. So it's a good meme.
I think Paul Graham was talking about cooking. He was like giving his kid advice, and he's like, when you have a girlfriend or something like that, like, they love to come home to the smell of like a meal being cooked. And then someone immediately, random Twitter troll is like, why are you raising like a feminine man? Like, he should be masculine. He doesn't need to learn to cook. And then I think Paul's reply was, learn to cook, loser. And then all the builders like Amjad and others, basically like tech people were like, this is actually good general advice. Like learn to cook as a high agency way of living. I think it's like the compressed idea of, build things, actually make things, actually go do things in the world that
totally
are of value. Maybe I'm reading too much into it.
It's a more succinct version of make something people want.
Yeah, it's the punched up version. Learn to cook, loser.
Is Paul Graham like the definition of success? Basically built like one of the greatest companies of all time, YC, and then it started working well, and then just bails to Europe, where he's living in I don't actually know if this is true, but it appears he's living in the woods, writing and being with his family. And I'm like, is this guy? Did he just pull the ultimate move, and it worked out perfectly?
I think so. I think he really did.
What's your version of that?
I mean, more or less like YC as a concept is like kind of a miracle. It's, there are very, very few places in the world where anything like YC ever happens. And then I just feel like I need to be like the watcher on the wall. It's like, okay, let's, this thing is working. And then it's working for relatively mysterious reasons that are almost too obvious. I mean, it's at once a mystery and it's obvious. YC itself is like pretty earnest. Like it's just make something people want, applying this thing. We'll try to go through and sincerely find the things we think could be really, really big. And then we just give you a bunch of money and throw you in a room with all the other people who are, sort of the top 1% of people trying to do that thing. And then somehow some magic happens where, 5 to 10% of those companies become worth $1 billion or more. And, YC takes some equity, but not that much, like 7%, specifically for people who often wouldn't have access to that capital or that network, like by default, anywhere else. I mean, so it's kind of cool. It's just, 1 + 1 = 3 in a really unusual way. It sort of resembles a college in some ways, only instead of people paying tuition, like we pay them.
When I think of good brands, a lot of people will just think of like funny or cool things. But when you think of like what BlackRock or Goldman, like some of these names, they're kind of like
Harvard
or Harvard. They're a little ominous and like a little scary, but they're institutions. Do you ever purposely think, how do we become an institution? Or is this just all because of, you just said, let's have high standards? Like, was it on purpose, or did it just happen because you had good values? How does that happen?
I mean, I think a lot of it comes back to, earlier we were talking about Paul Graham, and the guy's just a very unusual, original thinker and very just clear communicator. And then I think the thing I learned from him in particular is that clear communication and, just using basic logic, being able to explain, sort of, A to B to C, and then you zoom out and there's a really big idea in there. That's, in essence, what a really good pitch is. I think that's where it came from. Like Paul was just very, both frankly, Paul and Jessica Livingston, his wife and co-founder, the two of them basically created this thing that feels different, didn't feel like another investor, felt very welcoming. I mean, the sort of viral tweet I think PG has about Jessica is like, Jessica once cut a founder's fingernails before he went on stage at demo day or something, just because it's like sort of, at once very exacting. We have very high standards, but then it's at once also very sort of like almost family or like homey, just welcoming, and sort of that mix of both very earnest and very formidable. Like those two things combined created, I don't know, something that seems to create magic.
Isn't it wild, by the way? Like, just think about this. So one of my companies, I recently taken through like an M&A process, and I talked to bankers. And bankers, so you go first and interview bankers. You're like, why should I go with you? Why should I give you 4% of this transaction for 6 months of work here at the very end? And they're all about their differentiated process, how they do more, how they have the smartest people in the room, and all the things they brag about what makes them successful. On paper, makes sense, but it's kind of the midwit meme, because if you look at YC, it's like, yeah, we invest in people before they even have an idea a lot of the time. They have no traction.
Yeah, often they have to change ideas.
We don't negotiate every deal. We just 7% for every single company. Same deal. That's it. The application, yeah, it's like a one-page form you fill out online. The interview, yeah, we talk to you for 10 minutes and we just give you a thumbs up, thumbs down from there. Like all of the things YC
Is it
does
really
are
only
so
10
simple.
minutes?
Yeah, it's 10 minutes.
Oh my
It's
God.
a 10-minute interview.
Minutes. Yeah.
And they're picking winners at a higher rate than anybody else. I think they're attracting winners at a higher rate than anybody, so it makes it easier to pick. But they're picking winners at a higher rate than every other investor, even though their process is simpler and less than what you would think you need in order to be, the number one player in the space. And they basically, I think I've read the stat, it's pretty insane. You guys basically, every time you run a batch, you basically print $3 billion of market cap on average. I did some math and I looked at the batch values. So, like something like 5% of all the companies become unicorns, but you just do that a couple times a year. You're doing it twice a year. Now you're doing it 4 times a year. You're like, oh yeah, let's just print $3 billion of market cap 2 to 4 times a year.
Yeah,
that
wild.
Is mind blowing. Like that is so insane.
Yeah, I mean, I think the craziest thing I'd ever heard was basically the Airbnb round, where I think something like under $20,000 became $2 billion in the liquid IPO when Airbnb IPO'd. So, and YC didn't even take the pro ratas then. So it's pretty wild, honestly. Like, easily could have returned $5 to $7 billion with a good portfolio management strategy. But that's the thing. I think simple things work. Actually, it's
if YC was a company, because I think it's been around like 18 years. You said
18 years, yeah.
In the last 18 years, YC's got to be up there in like the top 10 Silicon Valley companies, things that got created that created so much value. Do you think about it that way, or do you have a good lens?
That's what I try and get people to understand. Like, this isn't just, working at a company. This is, I think we did the math on how much money per employee YC in theory should drive. And I think we're something like $20-ish million per year per employee in terms of like, sort of market cap value created in the world. Huh. And that's just the carry. Like, that's our take. Like, in terms of value created for our limited partners and, sort of overall in sort of, I think it's like close to 100 million per year per employee. So it's pretty wild.
Who are the LPs even? Is it like these pension fund types? Is it just like a VC fund?
People who invest in VC. I mean, the wild thing about YC is I think we're going to release a white paper on this pretty soon, but I haven't talked about this publicly before. We looked at a 2-year period from 2018 to 2020 of people who invested in at least 3 YC companies per batch for those 2 years. The top decile predictably was very good. It was like 16x. The top quartile was also very good. It was 8x. I mean, these are outrageous returns for such a short period of time in venture period. The wild thing, though, is median was 5x, and then the bottom quartile was 3.3x. So it's really crazy because in venture period, if you look at how VCs make money, it's all in the power law. There's only, sort of the top 25% make any money at all. And then the top quartile generally for any given year of VC is only 3x. So it's pretty wild what's happening.
You've read, I think I read something, you've read 6,000 YC applications. So you've seen more of this than anybody else. You're the admissions officer. You've been in a lot of these interviews. You've then seen the companies grow. What do the extreme winners look like early on? And do they look any different than the average company?
I mean, honestly, they're very similar. Like my 2 craziest wins, One was Brian Armstrong at Coinbase, and he was a solo software engineer working at anti-fraud at Airbnb, and he had never started a company before. He a lot of the things we worked on with him very early were like sort of the basics that it's sort of hard to believe now on the other side of him having built Coinbase. It's kind of hard to believe that there was a time when Brian Armstrong didn't know how to do a product launch or, even raise a single dime from investors. So I think it's basically been that same profile, like highly technical people who are just like sort of smart and earnest. And that's about it. Like that's sort of mainly who we like to fund. And then it's, I think, unusually really, really important today in 2024. I mean, large language models have basically opened everything up. I mean, almost anything that a knowledge worker can do, anyone with 130 IQ or below, pretty sure that with workflow and evals, you could write software now that could do what that, basically almost any knowledge worker could do. And you could do it perfectly with like no management headaches. It's, I think, like a really profound moment for all entrepreneurs, period.
Hey, let's take a quick break to talk about AI. We all know AI, big deal. You see demos all the time of people doing really cool things. But as a business owner, sometimes it's hard to figure out, how do I actually use this? What do I actually do? I've been trying to use it across all my businesses, things like making little prototype websites without needing to hire a coder, or writing copy for our website, or I give it a bunch of data and I ask it to analyze it for me. It's been kind of amazing. But the thing I always need is inspiration. I know the tool can do a lot, but it can almost do so much that I'm not really sure what I should actually be doing with it. And so that's why I think it's great that HubSpot has created a report where they surveyed 2,000 global marketing leaders and asked them what's separating the high growth and low growth businesses and what strategies they're using with AI in their business. You can grab these strategies and apply them to your own business for free. The link is in the description below. Yeah, I think me and Sam have both had learned to code on our to-do list for like 12 years. Bought the Python the hard way course on Udemy, did all that shit. I think we now we get to skip the learn to. It's just code now. You don't have to do the learn to part.
It's like you don't need to actually write it. I mean, it helps to be able to write a little bit yourself, but yeah, I mean, the wild thing from here is with like the new developments in O1 and code gen, I actually think it'll be more important that you're able to speak to virtual developers and like instruct them on exactly what you want and all the different use cases. And like, we're right at that moment where it's going from like, you really have to code it all yourself to you can just sort of talk to this pretty smart entity that will, do it mostly for you. Like, it's not even about no code anymore.
I was doing that the other day where I was talking to ChatGPT, where I was like explaining like, here's the problems my business is having. Can you help me? Like, can you just like be a therapist with me and help me like come up with interesting solutions? And the answers were shockingly good, by the way. It was like pretty good at just like brainstorming with me and just being like a sparring partner. Is there like I know that YC, a lot of it comes down to making people what people want and things like this. And to me, that's like a bit of an art where you're more of an artist than a scientist. But is there a world where you could take your 6,000 applications and a bunch of other data that you have and kind of spreadsheet your way to like the likelihood that we build a company that, and I think there's magic to create these like deca unicorns or whatever, but is there a way where you could like use your data and spreadsheet your way to like, well, here's the interesting opportunity. This is going to get to some type of traction and wealth creation with a high rate of certainty?
It's conceivable. Some of it is like, we think someone might do something like that and it might totally work actually. And then the trickiest thing is like, how do you actually get really smart people to come and do that thing? And, capital as a service has been, I think like Chamath talked about that. And I thought it was very interesting.
What did he say?
It sounds conceivable. I think they experimented with this when he was still working on Social Capital, where instead of having a 10-minute interview, and how it works at YC is we actually have 14 equal group partners, including myself. So we actually, hand read these applications, and, you're not talking to an AI when you do the 10-minute interview. It's literally just talking with us. And then once we fund you, we're just working with people day to day, for those 10, 12 weeks, and then onwards into the future of the company. Like we own, 7% of the company. We're like a big seed investor. So we need to sort of be around, and it's very like high touch, and you get like an individual person. And then I think like the capital as a service idea like is really just, connect your metrics, connect your Stripe account, your bank account, your QuickBooks. It's actually pretty doable today. Like it's conceivable that someone should connect all those things up, and then an LLM can just, rank whether something's real or not, do the diligence. And then if you like hit a certain bar, like boom, like here's money in your bank account.
Sam, did you ever see that when they did that for growth stage companies? I think they called it the 8-ball. It was like you connect all your data, and then it'll not just tell you, they could just take your raw data and they could put it into a format where they needed to analyze it. But then secondly, they benchmarked you. So they're like, oh, wow, they have best in class retention for this category, or they're below average, so don't invest, right?
But
so
I thought the results were like interesting, but not like
maybe too early.
Yeah, whereas like this is interesting. But do you remember when ChatGPT started getting popular? I think, Shaan, 2 years ago, and there was a guy on Twitter who had a really funny like name. It was like Greenpoint or something like that, and he told ChatGPT like, make me a content website that can rank high on search and it can monetize on ads. And I think within like 3 months, he got it to like $20,000 in monthly revenue. Do you remember that story?
Oh, yeah.
Like the normal way now is I prompt AI and I want AI to be an agent. What he did was the opposite. He's like, you tell me what to do. I'll be your human agent. But you have the good ideas. You prompt me. And I thought that was like kind of
I
the
bet it would
twist.
work extra well now with O1, like the new reasoning model.
Garry, can I ask you a question? You today you probably think about like, the future and billion-dollar ideas. But when you were 14, I read that you kind of had your own hustle there. You were cold calling companies in the yellow pages, trying to get work, and you made enough money to kind of actually like help your family out, like move from an apartment to a house. Can you tell that story? I've never heard that before.
Yeah, of course. Let's see. My parents, we grew up, sometimes food insecure. My dad was a foreman in a machine shop, and my mom was a home health aide and certified nursing assistant at convalescent homes. She worked 2 jobs. And me and my brother lived in, apartments in Fremont, in the Bay Area, sort of in the shadow of Silicon Valley. And I guess one of the weirder things is like my dad's actually an engineer, but he just didn't have the EQ to really hold on to jobs. And he also struggled with alcoholism. So he was always losing his job. And so we were always just like never had money around. And the thing was like, he really did invest in computers. Like we had our first computer was a, IBM PC XT. So, we were sort of reality poor, but, rich in access to computers, which was like really, really powerful for me. And I just realized, oh yeah, like I'm 14, but I, know how to make web pages. And I started winning some awards for like web design as a kid in junior high. I started an underground newspaper with my junior high friends. And we learned how to make a website for that underground newspaper. And we called it an online zine. And the funniest thing was like we had, thousands of people would find it off of Usenet news groups and things. And we'd write articles that, I don't think people knew that we were 14. Like when you're on the internet, one thing we learned is like nobody knows that you're a dog, I guess. I don't know. Like people would just write letters to the editor like we were like a legitimate publication. And I just got sort of really addicted to that.
Like an early Vice.com.
Yeah, basically. Like I think we wrote, my buddy wrote an editorial about, how the 3 strikes law was bad for California. And, we were like 12 years old. Like, what do we know about any of that stuff? But, on the internet, nobody can tell. And, I think we wrote it in pretty clear English. Like people couldn't tell that we were that young. And then I feel like I got really addicted to the internet. And then I thought, well, maybe I can make money. And, back then, there was a thing called the yellow pages that they'd throw on your doorstep, and that's how you would find businesses. And I thought, okay, the yellow page is probably my link to making money somehow. Like if they have a business and they have a little ad in the yellow pages, literally in the print section, like, and this was not so early that like the internet had eaten yellow pages yet, but it was late enough that there was an internet section. So I just started cold calling, seeing, hey, like I know how to make web pages. Will anyone hire me? And sure enough, I ended up getting a job and riding my bike to the local web design firm that made city websites for like city of Pleasanton and Fremont and San Jose. And, basically they paid me, $10, $7 and $10 an hour to work on. I mean, I learned how to do graphic design. I learned HTML.
What is that? What's that phone script?
Oh God.
Yeah, first you have to deepen your voice, right? You can't be 14 on the call.
That's right. And it's like, oh, I'm an award-winning web designer, and but I'm 14. So
Did you say that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's funny. I mean, I remember my first boss. This was sort of his like side hustle. So,
and by the way, is award-winning designer in your LinkedIn now?
Yeah,
I don't know if it is. I should add it again.
That's a miss.
We'll add it back. Yeah.
That's a miss.
It's funny. I mean, I remember it was like this company called InfoLane. It was, they had basically, I think it had a conference room and, sort of an engineer den and like a little reception desk. And that was the whole office. And I think it was one really technical, like sort of neckbeard Unix guy. And then the funny thing was the CEO was also a regional bank manager, I think, at Fremont Bank. And so, the tech guy had walked into the local Fremont bank and, the internet was happening. And this bank manager was like, I'm going to invest myself. Like, I'm going to invest my own money. And he became like the co-founder on this, web design firm in 1993, 94. So it was pretty wild to think about. I mean, that's just how you started business. And that was what business was. Like, you didn't go on the internet and apply on a form or something. You literally walked into a bank, and banks were supposed to loan you money to start companies, which, I think to some extent still happens. But, it's just funny to think like how that's evolved since.
And at some point, did you just make enough where you were like, Mom, Dad, here, like I can help, or what happened?
Yeah. I mean, I always lived in apartments growing up, and I had a little brother who was 8 years younger. And, I wanted us to I wanted the American dream. And so, I still remember like helping cook the turkey at Thanksgiving and, the new house that, our family bought. And, I helped my parents with the down payment, and my parents still live in that home in Fremont. So I'm helping them remodel it right now.
That's amazing. By the way, I looked up your old blog. I think back in 2001, you wrote the following, which I think is pretty accurate. You said, blogs are all over the place. This was back in 2001, so over 20 years ago. Pretty soon, we'll all just be writing a blog. We won't really talk to friends or have to catch up anymore. Human interaction will just boil down to clicking on someone's name on your favorite website, and that'll be it. No more tedious, how do you do over a nice matcha frappuccino at some pretentious cafe. Just read my blog if you want to know what's up.
Oh my God.
You basically predicted social media. It wasn't exactly blogging, but that's Instagram stories. That's Facebook. That's the news feed. Exactly. I think you nailed it, for better and for worse.
That's funny. Man, I wish, the one thing I wish I could do is like go back in time and tell myself, don't sell your time. Like, don't work for a consulting firm or like, get paid $10 an hour. Like, go make products.
But did you ever do that? I thought you were pretty young when you first started getting involved with YC.
Oh, I was 27, so I was much later, honestly. I mean,
you looked very young in the photos.
Like, you actually didn't need to come from the future, because I think I've heard a story that you were working somewhere, Microsoft or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
And Peter Thiel was like, hey, quit your job. In fact, I'll pay you your whole salary to quit your job and come co-found this new company, this little company we got called Palantir.
Yeah, it's like a $95 billion market cap company today.
And you turned them down. Could you, what the hell were you thinking? Could you just embarrass yourself here?
Of course. I mean, I went to Stanford, computer engineering. Changed my life, obviously. Fraternity brothers of mine, Joe Lonsdale and Stephen Cohen. Steph and I went to high school together, grew up together, tried to start a bunch of companies together. I was a year out of school. It was 2004. And I thought like, oh, look at me. I have health insurance. I have a real job. And then my old fraternity brothers who were a couple of years behind me at Stanford, like, I guess they couldn't get a real job. So they're going to, go start a company. I don't know. It's really funny to think about in retrospect. But, one of the things that was always really smart about the Peter Thiel world is when you start something, you always just need the smartest people around you. And I was lucky enough that I made, Joe and Stefan's list when that happened. And, Peter was just running the playbook that worked for him when he sold PayPal, which is, and this is something that people at Palantir do all the time now. It's like when you start a thing, you take a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper and you write down all the smartest people and then you go take them out to dinner and lunch and just sit on their doorstep until they quit their jobs to come join you. And I guess it was pretty wild. I mean, Peter was not a billionaire yet. I think like the funniest thing about PayPal and the PayPal mafia is that like they basically fought a land war in Asia against eBay. I mean, when you have to work on other people's distribution and other people's platforms, you just end up becoming like the most vicious, hardcore, builder, fighter types to just like gut it out to build a business on someone else's platform. And then the exit for PayPal was just not big enough that it made people like able to take lots of risk, but not so much that they had lost all energy and will to fight.
Well, and there was a bunch of them too, so that got divvied up a bunch.
Yeah, it's wild.
How much was Peter Thiel worth, do you think, at that conversation? Because like, let's say you made $80,000, that's like a big deal, right? To be out to dinner with someone, be like, I'll give you 80 grand right now just to quit.
Yeah, totally. To get a co-founder or co-founding engineer, like I some of it is like, I could see myself doing that today. I mean, I think Peter was probably worth like at least a couple hundred or at least 100 million at that moment.
More than enough to be able to say something like outlandish like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a fair trade today. Like I would definitely trade like my gold Rolex for a first co-founding engineer of a company that I think could be worth $100 billion in the future. That is a fair trade.
Did he make a compelling pitch like about the company, or was he just like, I don't know, this is just like a bet? Like, did he see the future in that sense of like what it became?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the thing I really learned from that moment, I mean, I was 22. I didn't know how the world worked at all. I mean, we had dinner at his French restaurant, Frison. I think that's one of the things you do when you make it to Centimillionaires. You do something stupid like open a restaurant. And I mean, the restaurant was terrible. Like the soup was really bad. And I mean...
He lost like millions of dollars on that restaurant, right?
I think so. I mean, today it's this really nice steakhouse, but yeah, it was bad. And then, what I should have done, I mean, I was so lacking in social graces. They did the whole pitch. And then I think I said no, like before the soup came out even. And so we were just like awkwardly sitting there for the rest of the dinner. And he had actually, he was like, here's a check, like $70,000. How much a year do you make at Microsoft? Here's $70,000. Cash this check. I didn't really understand it in the moment. And then I think in retrospect, like sort of the number one thing that I didn't understand that I do now sort of realize, like I have to tell everyone this is how it works is, I didn't join at the time because I thought that the world was sort of told to you or like, sort of narrated to you, I guess. I thought, the Wall Street Journal isn't writing about enterprise software. This isn't a hot space. And so, that was like fundamentally the backward way of thinking. Like the world doesn't like happen to you if you are actually a like prime mover in the world, like Peter Thiel or my friends. You go out and you go into the world and you discover something about the world. Like you actually talk to people, like you actually talk to your users, and I sort of gather primary first source information on how the world works. And what they had done was realize that the world's biggest companies and the world's biggest governments had no access to software engineers or, big data. Back then people said like big data or data mining was like, today we say AI, but either way, these were just buzzwords for concepts that are like actually pretty real. Like I think they, went into the security apparatus of like the 3-letter agencies in DC and realized like all the people they talked to, they were working, even CIA, NSA, like the, people who we expect to have the world's best technology, they really don't.
And Peter knew that because he somehow, the CIA, NSA, whatever, when PayPal was running, they're like, you guys want to have a conversation? Or like, how does like a Silicon Valley kind of outcast get a CIA tip?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know specifically. I mean, how they described it to me, I think was like, they learned a lot about how the world works through the anti-fraud part of PayPal. And the core idea was that they could find these fraud rings just using a graph database. Just literally, people make a bunch of fake identities. They send the money from one fake identity to another. And if you're just using SQL or a row-based method, you just couldn't figure it out. But the second you graphed it out, you would find this ring. And, what they found was that, the three-letter agencies didn't have access to that technology. So, what I needed to do was, instead of taking my worldview from the media or, today from social media or from, what reporters were sort of distilling for me, what I needed to do was listen to people who had actually lived direct experience in doing something unusual and strange and something that people...
That's simple, but that's still really hard to
Oh yeah, well, it was smacking me in the face, and I
you
didn't
had an
even
L6
see it,
promotion waiting on you, right? At Microsoft.
Yeah, I was trying to make it to level 60. Yeah, level 60 is hardly it's level 3 or something. It's brutal.
And by the way, Palantir, I've got friends that are there, and I've learned a little bit about it reading. It did not... Peter Thiel, I think it's easy for me to say. Peter Thiel back then seemed like an obvious winner. But the Palantir idea didn't, it seemed like it didn't work for 2 years or something like that. It seemed like it had this normal startup trajectory where it's it's not working, maybe it's working, it's definitely not working. All right, now it actually has legs, the YC Trofasaro thing. It seemed like it had those normal issues, except for maybe 5 years.
Yeah, it took many, many years before it started driving revenue and became real. Yeah, the trickiest thing, YC companies always come to me and ask, what could I learn from the Palantir experience? And I'm like, is your name Peter Thiel? And are you willing to put, tens of millions of dollars of your own money into it before, and sort of wait and be incredibly patient and ignore all the signs that you weren't getting revenue and not, actually working for so long to the point that, suddenly it started absolutely working and working 10 times better than you thought it would. That's just not a thing that people are really capable of doing on certainly their first $1 million or their first, Palantir is sort of the most amazing version of the second or third startup that people do. Your first startup, you got to just gut it out sometimes. It's how do you get to your first $1 million, right?
Well, that is the name of the podcast.
Indeed.
And so I'm curious, what's your advice or take on that? How did you do it? How did you think about it? And knowing what you know now, how would you go make your first $1 million?
Yeah. I mean, what's funny is in the end, Palantir ended up being huge, but it didn't really IPO until many, many years later. It's I designed the logo in 2000. I joined as employee number 10. We would do these ridiculous things go to Stanford and give out pizza. And then we were 10 people, 15 people working there. But the pizza box would have our Palantir logo that I designed and join the next Google. And nice. People would eat the pizza and they'd give us dirty looks how dare you? It's what the heck is wrong with you guys? And then let's see. My first win, the Palantir shares did turn out to be something, but it did not seem like it was going to for a really long time. I think my first actual $1 million was selling a few $1 million worth of Twitter stock at IPO. And so it was actually really late, 20. For me, I started working in tech when I was 14, so 1996, 95. And then, I think it literally took 18 years of working as an engineer and not having money and having $50,000 credit card debt coming out of college. And I think that might have even been one of the reasons why I didn't quit to join Palantir. I was it felt, in 2004, I still had $30,000, $40,000 in credit card debt and maybe $50,000 in student loans. And I was well, 70,000 is a lot, but how am I going to actually, I don't know if this job will even exist in 6 or 9 months. And I could be a lifer at Microsoft. And of course, in retrospect, it's being a lifer at Microsoft would be sort of a life of torture at some level. So yeah, my first $1 million was actually Twitter stock. So I started a company in 2008 called Posterous. It was a blog platform.
I used to use it. I love Posterous.
Yeah, it was dead simple blogs by email. You just emailed post@posterous.com. You didn't have to log in or learn how to use software. And then we just reply back with here's your blog, here's your website. And, you could send it to your friends and it was sort of like an email list too. So you could do it with your family. A lot of people used it to like share photos with their family. It grew 10x year on year, 2 years in a row until Instagram came out. I remember when Instagram came out, Posterous was actually one of the little check marks. It's lost to the sands of time. I think it was like, Posterous, Tumblr, Foursquare, Twitter, and
I
like
remember all
the
that
sharing page. And I remember Chris Sacca, one of our investors, emailed us about it and was like, "Hey, what do you think about Instagram?" And before I could reply, my co-founder replied, "It sucks." I was like, and we got a one-line reply from Sacca saying, "I'm very disappointed in you guys." And then I just was like, sleep deprived, didn't think about it again. But like, I think about that all the time now because, when you're working on a startup, like, we didn't actually even totally understand why we were growing that fast. In retrospect, it was actually because the iPhone was new and people were taking lots of photos and there were no apps that made it easy to upload. And then Instagram was sort of the first free app that created a network that also even had a little bit of utility with their filters, and it was all free. And basically, we got run over by the eventual winner. And, I think that's one of the big dangers for founders, period, is when we launched in 2008, Michael Arrington at TechCrunch wrote about it and he framed us off the bat. He was like, Posterous is way easier to use than Tumblr. And so we sort of made a mistake and took like that competition and then made it our identity. And it's something that advice that I have to give to founders all the time now, which is like, we weren't competing against Tumblr. We were competing against how people were getting photos off of their phone, actually. But, when you're not careful, you sort of allow media or other people to sort of frame your reality, and then you just play the wrong game. Like Tumblr didn't even want to be Tumblr. That ended up having zero enterprise value. I think that's also one of the cool things about Silicon Valley is like you can even sort of screw it up. If I really introspect on what I wish happened, we had about 1 million users who were like super dedicated to Posterous. We easily could have, sort of charged $5 or $10 a month for it. We would, we were a team of like 12 people. We easily would have been profitable. And then I remember because we were hanging out with our friends at Weebly, like David Rusenko and Dan Veltri, who were amazing. I mean, they only ever raised a tiny amount of money out of demo day and never raised a Series A.
And what did they eventually sell for, like $300-400 million?
Yeah, to Square, like sort of, I think pre-IPO. And then Square, of course, like went on its crazy run. So these guys are like made, 100 times more money than me and my co-founder at Posterous. Like, rightly so. They did it not through like continuing to raise venture dollars, but by being profitable, cash flowing, by compounding, by focusing on their users and like playing their own game instead of playing the game that was like can be sort of chosen for you by either your investors or social media or by reporters and tech press. Like, just play your own game, like make up your own mind. So, if I did it again, like we easily probably could have done that. And then instead, I think we ended up pivoting out of, that Posterous idea. And, we were just wanting to continue to chase this idea that we could be the free social network. And I distinctly remember meeting Peter Fenton at Benchmark, and he passed on our Series A because we didn't have a good answer for this. He asked, are you a platform or are you a network? And we said both, because that's what founders who like don't have strong opinions end up saying. I think like
it's a multiple choice test. You just circled A and B.
Yeah.
Can't be wrong that way.
But I don't know. This is all 2020 hindsight. I mean, I use these stories all the time to try to help founders get on the right path to real enterprise value all the time now, right? So, it's not just make something people want and raise a Series A and B and like look like a successful startup. It's actually make something people want, and that's the end in itself. And if you do that, like you're going to make money, and hopefully you can compound that and like create real enterprise value for yourself. And that's sort of the game.
We want to ask you a bunch of questions about different stories, because you probably have a lot of stories. But what's interesting about that story is you left Palantir is a very, I don't know if it felt it that way then, but now it's a very serious company. where like they prevent terrorist attacks at times. So like it's a very serious product. What you were working on after that, you could like, someone could be like, well, that's just like a blogging platform, or that's just this, like, that's quote, less serious. Did you ever, like, I mean, I guess I'm self-projecting because I feel this way sometimes where I'm like, I'm doing something that's not serious, but you kind of have done both, and now you're back to a relatively serious thing. YC is a multi-billion-dollar company. How do you balance like working on something that seems fun and cool versus like a serious big thing?
I mean, I think that goes back to what we were saying a little bit earlier, which is just like, be careful what frame you accept. It's all made up, but you get to make it up. And then, for Posturous and blogging, like they said the same thing about Facebook. And I remember spending time with Boz and, a bunch of our friends who were early Facebookers. They never accepted the frame that Facebook was not a serious and important thing. Their narrative was very clear. Like they had a very strong cult, and the cult was just clearly once every few decades. I think very explicitly Zuck would say this, like once every few decades, like everything would change. Media would totally change. And like they were right. Like this social layer came up. And, this is sort of the reason why I feel like if you're running a business today, you kind of have to be a creator, because if you're not a creator, you got to buy eyeballs somehow. And guess who's got the monopoly on eyeballs? Larry and Sergey and Mark Zuckerberg. You got to go pay, you got to pay the toll to, go across the bridge. Like, the second price auction mechanism in the ad networks for like all incremental attention is so valuable that these are like the most durable, powerful network effects businesses that like cannot be disrupted.
So wait, are you telling all YC founders to go and build an audience online?
Oh, if you're doing consumer, you basically have to, right?
What about
sometimes even if you're dev tools, like you?
But yeah, wouldn't you say the same thing if you're a B2B? Like, isn't it even more valuable because you need a smaller, more targeted audience?
Oh yeah, that'd be great. It's harder to target.
That's a pretty interesting thing. You didn't say this. I'm putting words in your mouth. But if you are saying to all the
oh yeah. Yeah, we have Mark Pincus coming to speak at our mini conference later today, and we're going to talk about it. It's like, how do you actually get incremental customers? And distribution really matters for consumer businesses, but that's also why we've had a dearth in really breakout consumer businesses for 10 years. I think that this will change. I mean, with AI does change things. I don't think it's broken the distribution advantage. I think that the big tech companies have a total stranglehold on the incremental user, and you have to pay them still. I mean, it's just purely market dynamic, right? Like, we're selling widget X or game X or dating site X or whatever it is, but, our, buddy from college or, or someone from halfway around the world in Eastern Europe can like take what we've done and like do the exact same thing, or go to our supplier in China and like get the same drop shipping relationship. And so at that point, like the second price auction means like, well, I want that customer. No, I want that customer. No, I want that customer. Guess what? It's an auction. Like every incremental dollar that is gross margin, Google or Facebook will just extract because it's a perfect marketplace. And that's just the world we live in right now. And then, I think that the purest form of alpha that exists still is saying interesting, valuable things that, and the YouTube algorithm and the X algorithm and, to a less extent, like Instagram. I mean, I think TikTok is actually pretty wild. Like they're just giving away distribution over there, especially for brand new creators. I think Meta is probably really dropping the ball on how they're thinking about creators. They just like, I don't know what's going on over there. Seems like they only want to satisfy the people who are already big, which, is not that helpful for people who are trying to do new things. But yeah, that's sort of the regime we live in. For B2B, what we see at YC is that, probably 70 or 80% of companies are B2B. And our most well-attended mini conference every batch is actually the sales mini conference. Pete Kazanji, Founder Sales, like that book, we give a copy of that to like literally every founder. A lot of it is about a mindset shift. Like most people have never been rejected 95 out of 100 times. Like it's just so like soul crushing to get no that many times in your life. But it's also, for 80, 90% of businesses today, you better get good.
if your website conversion rate's 5%, you're doing phenomenal. You go out and knock on 100 doors and get 95 no's, you feel like you're the biggest failure in the world. And it's the same conversion rate.
And you shouldn't because you got five. You got 5 enterprise contracts paying you $10,000 to $100,000 a year. Like, you're the biggest winner in the world. Like, that's how this stuff works.
We got to ask you about some of the people that you've been able to meet. I'll tell you what I want, and I hope that you give it to us. Sure, I don't know if you will or you won't, but like, so me and Sam kind of are in what I'll call like the way that most people live their life, which is you wake up every day, you got your project, your business. It doesn't matter if you're doing, $10,000 a month or $100,000 or $10 million a month. Doesn't really matter. You wake up every day, and then we all look for kind of like this entertainment inspiration thing. And we get a lot of it from Twitter, from podcasts. And one of the best things is when you hear about the way that some of the people you admire operate, or the way that they handle things, or the way that they dealt with a situation, or something about their personality. And of course, it's sort of, a caricature. It's not a perfect picture, and whatever. They're not perfect people, but it is badass to hear those stories. And we hear them about Elon, but you run in a really amazing circle where, Paul Graham, Sam Altman, like all of the YC network are people you've been around. You've been around them before they were, big and since. I would love if you could tell us a couple of like either personality traits or stories that stand out for some of the people. So I'm curious. It's a long-winded way of saying, can you tell me some cool stories about some of these characters that you've run into?
Absolutely. The funniest story I remember from working with Paul Graham in the office, I mean, he gave me my first shot as an investor and as an advisor to startups. I was burnt out from Imposterous. My co-founder and I had like a falling out, and he wanted to become Google Groups. And I was like, dude, I don't even think that Google wants to be running Google Groups. Like, what? We should just charge money. But Paul, I think really did, like, Paul and Jessica basically did all the admissions, worked with all the companies. It was like 2011, even the whole YC campus was not a campus. It was like a warehouse with some carpet and some custom, very cheap. I mean, there's just tables and benches. The benches were so rickety that if you sat on one side, and the other person on the other side, stood up, you'd fall over. There's just a bunch of funny things about YC early. It was this tiny thing. And to paint a picture, people still, when I said I was going to go work at YC as a designer in residence, my friends in venture or startups would say, oh, that's nice. It sounded like I was going to volunteer at a high school camp or something. It was like a high school basketball camp or something. It was like, oh, that's nice. That's so, I hope you enjoy that. You're
good
doing
for you.
Community service. Good for you.
Good for you.
Exactly. And, Dropbox had happened as and it had become $1 billion company, but Airbnb, I think, was just about to become $1 billion company. And, I think this is lost to the sands of time, but I remember Sarah Lacy had written a book called 1 Year Lucky, 2 Year Good. So that, 2011, I think, was the 1 year lucky, 2 year good moment for YC, where people realized, oh, this isn't some fringe thing. It's actually starting to churn out basically the most dominant startups that exist. It's a very concentrated form of Silicon Valley. And about that time, there was literally one person who did all the books, all the finances, all the audits, all the CFO stuff. And she needed a copy machine. So she got one of those sort of waist height copy machines that, looked corporate. And it had these little stickers on it. And then I remember Paul Graham came in. He's like, what is this? Why is this here? And it was sort of this totem of corporateness. He's like, I remember seeing these at Yahoo and I hated them. He started scraping off the sticker that had the phone number of the little company that would maintain the copy machine. And I guess it just jumps out at me as this very interesting quirk of Paul that was absolutely right. And, I sort of stay up at night thinking about how do I make sure that YC never feels corporate. PG would show up in shorts and Birkenstocks all day. I think he wore khaki pants to my wedding. So my mother, my sister-in-law was like, "Excuse me, sir, this is a private wedding." And I'm like, "No, that's my boss." So I mean, there's this. I think what I learned from Paul was that I think there is an insidious nature to like formality and corporateness and just like having to wear a suit or the convention, right? Like, I think there's incredible value in being very, very unconventional. Whenever there is prestige and or convention, you should be wary of that thing because, there's got to be some other weird soul-sucking things that are associated with that no one by default would sort of choose to have, a dress code or like what are some other examples of this? Like, basically you should be aware about your own formality and try to fight against it. It's just like, try to be super matter of fact. And I think that's one of the things that just makes companies bad. I wonder, like, as people who run your own businesses, do you ever think about that? Like, you go into a meeting and you just think like, was that a meeting that if I were not me running this place, like, would I want to be in that meeting?
Well, it's the same thing as what you said about the framing thing. You behave like you think you're supposed to behave versus what kind of makes sense. You start playing business a little bit. It's sort of like, when you start a company, a lot of people play business by getting like a business card before they get a customer. And then you kind of snap out of it. You're like, no, dude, I got to make the damn thing. And you start making the damn thing and you start getting some customers. And then you kind of go back to playing business again.
Yeah.
Which is definitely part of the Silicon Valley thing, like OKRs, measuring things quarterly. Like, there is a bunch of like lameness that I myself fall victim to, and you have to like pull yourself out of that trap. But some of it is like useful. I guess if you're Airbnb, if you have 6,000 employees, you do slow down. But it's hard to know what's truth versus what you should do versus what you have to do, type of thing.
I will say that I think it's possible for people to do insane business now with like 2 pizza teams. Like, I think that we, probably in your community, or maybe you guys yourselves, will end up making these like $100 million to like $1 billion a year businesses that are totally empowered by large language models that like do not need more than 20 people working at them. I think that this is literally the most exciting news that, we're pretty sure is going to happen the next few years, especially right now. And like, that is the one thing that these giant companies that have like thousands of people, like, it is completely like corporate America is completely unprepared for this moment. Like, they're just going to get run over by 1,000 startups that are way more agile, that, aren't completely drowning in convention. They can just do the right thing for the customer, and the cost basis will come down a ton. The trickiest thing is like, I'm not sure if it's inflationary or deflationary, like what's going to happen here, right? Like, prices in theory should come down. Things should get a lot more competitive. I mean, on the flip side, like, the hope is that all of our, products and services get a lot better, cheaper, faster, real fast. I mean, this is the moment. Like, literally, we talk to people who are eng managers and like CTOs and like even engineering teams. I think that it's almost generational. Like, it's like in the water for us right now because we spend all of our time with like 22, 25, 28-year-olds who are like the me from, 15 years ago. Like, we're just helping the next generation right now. And they were like born on the internet. They were born with large language models, and then there's sort of, frankly, I'm 43, like my generation of C-levels, like, I don't think people are prepared or even aware of what's about to happen right now. And it's like super, super good news for anyone who's running a business who's super agile, because you don't have to be doomed to calling in the business process automation call center. You don't have to like hire the team in the Philippines anymore. If anything, like, that's one of the more direct advice we give to people looking for startup ideas in the batch right now. If people are pivoting, we're like, okay, well, you're selling to, let's say, like accounting firms, but you're having trouble with enterprise sales. What if you targeted people who already spend, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on a call center in the Philippines or Eastern Europe or anywhere else? Like, why don't you just reach out to people like that and just replace what they rely on, there with large language models that have great evals and great workflow? Like, that is just, I think we will have many companies driving tens to hundreds of millions of dollars, like literally in the next like 2 years. It's just like hundreds of them, thousands of them are going to pop up right now, just doing that.
That's so exciting.
What companies are are you super excited about that we should watch out for, or we should go check out? Because you live in the future. You're further in the future than we are.
Obviously, like the tooling for this is important. Like there's going to be a lot around helping people build this stuff. Like evals in particular, like doing it test driven is important. The danger for most founders right now is it's very easy to make demoware that you can use to raise money. And then you're tempted to sort of, quote unquote, raw dog your prompts. Like you will just write code that has some prompts and you won't write any tests. And then the funny thing that we're seeing right now that I think is super true is, again, like going back to what we were saying earlier, like it's important to build your worldview on how the world works directly from customers and their customer data. So the sort of rinse and repeat thing that's like maybe 80% of what YC companies are doing right now that I think anyone could do is go and find real people who like are running businesses and they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on giant teams of people doing like rote repeating knowledge work, and then get access to their data, get access to the flow of their work, watch how they do it, and then literally write test cases using, and if there's hallucination or the LLMs aren't actually able to like consistently do the thing you want, you actually have to chop down the prompts more. Like you're asking for the LLM to do too much. Like the LLMs are capable of maybe like 120 IQ level work right now. And if you're, giving it like too much in the context window and asking it to output too much, it's just like, do it in steps, right? This is literally what O1 and reasoning already does using chain of thoughts. The interesting thing and weird thing that I'm tracking right now that I'm a little bit worried about is it is entirely possible that the next generation of large language models from Anthropic and OpenAI and Meta are 1 and then 2 orders of magnitude in like compute and number of parameters, and then we just get like the Dario Amodei scaling laws paper specifically says like, these big large language model AI labs are going to spend $1 billion and then $10 billion on the next generations. And like, if we get like continued step function improvement, like the trickiest thing is like all the stuff that even what we're doing as founders are doing, like, maybe the models will just do for themselves. And, I think that my hope is that, there's not enough agency in these things. And then, maybe what will happen, what we hope and what we think will happen is that the people who establish brands and moats and evals right now, when the next generation models happen, their cost structure just comes down by like 10x. And then they already have like the revenue and the market captured in some way that they're like sort of beating the software incumbents that they're going up against. They themselves have like tens to hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. And then like basically the standard moats apply. Like look at Porter's 5 forces and you're like, your data, you have way better access to data. Your systems are way smarter. It costs a lot of money to take a risk and switch off of those systems. And then you have a sales force that is way better and smarter. And so if you take all, that's sort of the gambit right now. Like if you do prompts and evals, you're pulling forward the future by a few years. You're trying to like grab as much land as you possibly can right now. And then from there, like hopefully you can hold on and build the next Microsoft or the next Salesforce or, the next 10 to $100 billion company.
Was it obvious when Sam Altman left YC to do this?
I wish I was smart enough to predict that this was what was going to happen.
Did you think that he was going to be the man like he is now? Like, Paul Graham has that essay where he's like, here's 5 people I'd bet on. And one of them, the 5th one was like a 25-year-old Sam Altman. And the other 3 were like, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. And then he said, this kid. So were you like, whatever Sam does is going to be a generational company? Or were you like, it might be, it could be mildly successful?
I mean, I think it could. I bet in full transparency, like I'm going to be super honest. I was like, man, I don't quite get it. When he was sitting in my shoes as president of YC, he'd come back and I remember sitting in the group partner room and he'd say like, well, this is what Elon was talking about. And this is what Larry was talking about. And, they were all talking about AI, and they were, sort of talking about these sci-fi scenarios. And I'm like, man, I saw Terminator 2 too, but that was a movie. Okay. And, I think that I'm changing my tune at this point. Like I wish that it was smart enough to be, actually totally a believer. I'm a believer now. Do I believe that we're going to end up in like a doomsday scenario? Like, I still don't really believe that there's that much agency in these things, which is sort
but
of
your judgment now is questionable. First Palantir, now OpenAI. Thank God that you've like already made so many other successful investments, that I know that Gary's got good judgment and like can predict the future a little bit, because
I'll come around eventually. Like I'm just a year off.
He was Palantir employee 10 after he said no to the co-founder.
That's true.
Well, he ended up there, right? So
I mean, now we are full believers in large language models. But I think the thing that's a little bit lost to the sands of time is that what Sam was absolutely right about was jumping on this thing that the smartest people in the world were already talking about, like 8-9 years ago. And then he built it. He invested the money. He brought together the people. It was no small task to bring together the smartest AI researchers in the world. And then not only that, it was like semi-miracle. You could ask, why didn't Meta do this before? Why didn't Google do this before? Why didn't Microsoft Research do this before? Like, all of those people had virtually limitless access to resources. And to weave this back together, I think there is something really terrible and limiting about like giant organizations that are not capable of evolving and making smart decisions. I mean, that's what big tech is like. They're sort of like big daycares for the most technical, smart people in the world. And it's like, here, play some volleyball. We'll cook you lunch. Like here's do your laundry at work. Let's totally infantilize the smartest people in the world. And like, that's a waste of time. Like, what needed to happen was the ability, one of the things that got explained to me why it was OpenAI that came up and like invested, millions first, and then tens of millions and hundreds of millions into the large language model and, transformers for language. If you were at Google, you needed to work this bureaucracy. It was like highly political. You had hundreds of other researchers, all of whom were all as smart as you. And you had a finite sort of limited set of compute. And, what you would find is that Google would do really breathtakingly amazing work, but then you'd have like 30 different authors, and if you'd read the paper, there'd be like these sort of like strange things that seem like it was a little bit tacked on. But that's the only way you could get the compute resources to actually pull off a training run on like the model that you wanted to do. Like, you had to do some weird things to accommodate like people who were going to commit their training resources for their like random little thing. And so it's funny to see that, human progress is more or less a little bit impeded by the bureaucracy and lack of governance and lack of agency that large organizations just sort of like impose on people. Like, you don't have a choice.
Isn't it crazy that it was easier for them to invent and discover transformers and this large language model breakthrough than it was for them to navigate the bureaucracy to actually like create a product out of this or do anything useful with it? Like, that should tell you kind of everything you need to know.
Yeah. I mean, the wild thing is like, even with an OpenAI, like they did everything right. Like GPT-3 was very impressive. 3.5 was even more. 4 was incredible. But like, they were going to just put it behind an API, and like explicitly for many years, OpenAI was supposed to be we're a research lab, not a product company. And, it took the relatively Herculean efforts by product people inside OpenAI to even release, ChatGPT, which turned out to be the greatest consumer launch of maybe in the history of consumer launches, actually.
Hey, you said, and I know we got to wrap it a second, but you said you keep talking about this thing. It's pretty amazing about talking to the smart people, and like what are they talking about? You have access to more of those types of people than probably most anyone on earth. What's the conversation right now, or is it all AI still?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, that's sort of the number one thing that we're pretty excited about. I mean, that, a few people who are really smart can sit in a room and, make a thing that literally does what humans do all day. I would make a pitch that often the best things that could be automated are actually very rote. They're sort of the knowledge worker equivalent of like hand looming a carpet or something. It's like, all I do all day is look at an email box, see if someone paid their bill, reconcile that against a ledger in QuickBooks. Like, can you imagine, millions of people, like tens of millions of people on the planet, like that's their 9 to 5, like that is not a good use of a very smart human being, generally speaking. And like, those are sort of the things that are most easily replaced by really great prompting, great evals. And frankly, I think, there are going to be 20-person software engineering focused startups that basically turn, billions of dollars in payroll into billions of dollars in software revenue. And hopefully those people go on to do much smarter and much more interesting jobs than like passing butter all day.
That's amazing. Garry, if you have 1 minute, can you tell the spoon bending story? I think this is a very powerful story that you have. The spoon bending party. I don't know if you know this.
Oh God, it's hilarious. I've been to Burning Man a few times. I love Burning Man. It's my favorite place to take a break from consensus reality and realize that it's all made up, but you get to make it up. And there's a lot of like weird fringe stuff, a lot of like 60s, like esoterica, you're just wandering around the desert on a bike with your buddies. And, I think we randomly walked into a spoon bending party where they were, it was a huge group of, I think it was almost like a magician at the front, like sort of helping people. The shtick was that they were going to teach you how to bend a spoon with your mind. I was like, okay, that's cool. Like, let's go check it out. They passed out these spoons. And then it was like a magic trick. They said, okay, now bend your spoon with, like, look at your spoon and bend it with your mind. And then in between, they would say, like, okay, well, sometimes you need to use your hands and like warm up the spoon to bend it. And then basically, I think what you're supposed to do literally is just bend the spoon with your hands. And that's what, and then what's funny is by the end of it, half of the people, like I had a bent spoon because I was like, oh yeah, like they said, like, oh, I should, sort of warm up the spoon with my hands and bend it with my hands.
Just to get it started. Just to get it started, right? And then by the end, like half of the room had bent spoons and the other half didn't. And the ones that didn't were like, how did you do that? That's absolutely incredible. And I was like, guys, it's a bit. It's a bit. Like you have to, first know that you can bend the spoon with your mind, but then you bend it with your hands, guys. Like that's literally like the shtick, actually. And it's a little bit of an allegory for bias to action and what you're supposed to do in real life. Like real life is sort of like this exercise. Like they say, like you can go change the world and you can do it with your very ideas. But like, that alone is not enough. Like you actually have to go with your hands and go talk to users and, sit and build a thing. And so, don't forget the second half. And the wildest thing is like more than half of the room could not do it. And so if you are the person who's able to bend this, bend the spoon with your mind, like, guess what? You also used your hands. Like you got to do that. And, and actually like, that's maybe like the greatest gift. It's just like, dude, Garry, you're the shit, man. You are the best. I love talking to you. You make me feel really great. You give me energy. And we're very, very, very thankful that you took the time to do this.
Thank you guys so much for having me. Always great to see you guys. And, congrats on all the success and excited to see where you and your community go. I mean, we're all building the future out here.
Well, thank you for saying that.
Take care, Garry.